Hello, everybody. So I'm going to start with the land acknowledgement. So we are, or at least I am, on Vancouver General area, so on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. If our panelists are joining from anywhere else, they can add if they'd like. So we're going to be having a conversation about patient-oriented research today. And so a brief definition about patient-oriented research. Patient-oriented research is about engaging patients, their caregivers, and families as part of the research process. And we have some wonderful speakers today who are have been involved in patient-oriented research in a different way. So we'll start introducing them independently. I'm going to start with Erin. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Erin Mahalak, and it's my pleasure to be joining you from Huesam, which is Roberts Creek on the Sunshine Coast, the beautiful traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish people. I am a professor at UBC in psychiatry, where I've led a program of research into community engagement in people with bipolar disorder for a number of years. And in another part of my life, I work very heavily with the BC Support Unit, who you'll hear about today, moving forward over the next few years, really focusing on supporting equity and diversity and inclusion in health research. And I also like to introduce myself by saying something that's nothing to do with my work life. When I'm not working, right now we're building a mini farm, and we're very much focused on turkeys and a new breed of turkeys that we have, which are supposed to be good natural breeders, but we're not yet seeing any turkey monkey business happening in their cages. So I spend a lot of time watching the turkeys to see what they're up to, in the hope that they'll do some breeding for us.
That's very great. Kristi, would you like to go?
Sure, just had to unmute, found my unmute button. Erin, I think that made my day, so thank you for that. Hi, everyone. I'm Christy Coldwell, and I am joining you all from the traditional and unceded territories of the Stolo, the Kwantlen, and the Katzies peoples, and very grateful to be joining you today. I am a patient partner in various capacities as a result of my extensive lived experience with our healthcare system, both as a congenital heart patient and then later as a heart transplant recipient, and all that that entails. And I also work at the Transplant Research Foundation of BC as Senior Advisor for Research Advocacy. And I will just say that I also foster little senior rescues, and I've got 4 at my feet right now. And I apologize in advance if anyone comes to my dark light, frankly, because chaos is going to ensue. So just a heads up on that front. But yeah, I'm looking forward to being with you today and sharing some of my insights and experiences. And I will actually hand it over to Victoria.
Thanks. It's so great to get to know everybody with sort of the outside sort of interests and things like that. I love dogs, so actually I hope somebody does knock, so you have to pick one up. Hi, everyone. My name is Victoria Maxwell. Really happy to be here. I'm calling in from Wilquay, colonially known as Half Moon Bay, also on the Sunshine Coast, unceded traditional territories of the Shashala and Squamish First Nations. I'm a patient partner. I live with bipolar disorder, anxiety, and psychosis. I really like to mention also that I'm really glad and very grateful to be on these territories because the lands themselves have been really important in my recovery to maintain my mental health and managing it as well. I work with the BC Mental Health Substance Use Services as a patient partner, also with Erin's team, CREST, the Bipolar International Collaborative Research Team. And then aside from that, my more full-time job is as a performer and keynote speaker. I'm probably best known for a couple of my solo shows that I perform about my own experience with mental illness. And something outside of my interests, I guess, I've started sewing. I can't say that I know how well I sew because I don't really know how to sew. But I bought a sewing machine. I've taken my first class. The teacher was great, so what I produced was really good, but it had a lot to do with her actually. So that's what I'm hoping to do over the holidays, is do a little bit of simple sewing and stuff. So yeah, and Larry, I guess it's on to you.
Thanks, Victoria. I'm Larry Mroz. I'm the Patient-Oriented Research Services Lead for the BC Support Unit, which is a unit of Michael Smith Health Research BC, and I'm calling from Vancouver, traditional Coast Salish territories. My background is kind of varied. I've got a molecular biology history, and then I switched over to qualitative health research. So I have a bit of a varied background in research, and my work in the support unit is to help to build patient engagement into all types of research, including preclinical research, where it doesn't seem as obvious, but it's very doable. And I don't have any little dogs running around or turkeys, but I've got lots of plants, and they kind of stay to the side. Although, of course, now my cat has decided that she wants to be part of this. But anyway, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to talking to you all.
Awesome. Thank you all for introducing yourselves. I really loved all of your anecdotes. So our first question that we have for you is pretty basic, is to define sort of what is patient-oriented research and how do you do it in the most basic terms. I guess I should pick who to pick. I'll let Larry go first.
Sure. I think this is the question we get asked a lot. And I just want to start off by saying that patient-oriented research is different for everybody who does it. So there's not a particular formula for it. But the key important thing with this is that you invite and include actively and meaningfully someone with lived experience of the research that you're wanting to do. I'm talking from a researcher's perspective because that's my background. But I think that's really the most important thing. Do you have everybody at the table that you need to help you make decisions about your research? And if you don't have someone who's lived through what you're researching, you don't have everybody at the table.
Thank you.
I'm wondering how a patient partner might describe patient-oriented research.
I'll go. So I also want to just make a quick note here that I know we're using the term patient a lot. You're going to hear that it's called patient-oriented research. But I think it's really important to note that patient is just one possible identifier that can be used. And it's really what Larry said. It's about that lived or that living experience that is so critical. That is the focus of the research. So it's about ensuring you're integrating those voices, those perspectives of people who have that lived experience of that illness or that disease. That is the focus. So I just wanted to make that little tidbit there. And I'd further add to that I think it's about meaningful engagement. And to me, that's about valuing, respecting, and really hearing those voices and those perspectives and ensuring that they're involved in helping to shape that research or those research activities and, defining those priorities as well as having that voice in decision making. I don't know if Erin or perhaps Victoria has anything else you'd like to maybe add to that too.
Yeah, I mean, I would also echo that, is that like with the BC Mental Health Substance Use Services, I'm considered sort of a lived experience strategic advisor. So that ability to participate in all levels is embedded in their process, and also in CREST, where I think it's not just consulting, it's about having influence. So for me, that meaningful input is about having influence and seeing my influence in action. And I've experienced that on both. I've also been part of a recovery college research project, but particularly with Erin's work and BC MHSUS, where I've seen not just collaboration, but the ideas come to fruition that have been driven by the needs and priorities of the individuals that have had the lived or living experience, from the basic of what language do we want to use to what do we want to focus on and study, how do you want to do that, what do you think is the most important thing. And so to me, that's where you're really doing really effective and good research, when you're involving everybody at the table.
Thanks, Victoria. And then I think from the perspective of our work in CREST and related to clinical and basic research, even more so, I think one of the really important things to acknowledge right up front is that there's a vast spectrum of different types of engagement that can and should happen across different projects. And I think one of the fears for people that's quite frequent when they're engaging maybe for the first time in patient-oriented research is thinking that it does need to happen at every single stage of the research process and the knowledge translation process. And I just want to put it out on the table at this point that isn't always the case, that there are some projects where it makes sense to inject real, authentic, meaningful lived experience at a certain stage. And it's not necessarily always woven, certainly even in my projects, all the way through. And I think when we might come back to this point in our discussions, but I'll just lay out that there is no cookie cutter approach to effectiveness for me in this space.
Thank you, guys. Our next question is what the benefit of patient-oriented research is in clinical and preclinical research. I feel like this is pretty related to the previous question. So maybe I'll ask Kristi or Victoria to speak first on what they feel the benefit is to people with lived experience getting to participate in patient-oriented research.
Do you want to go first, Victoria? I took the first one. I'll let you go first this
Okay,
time.
for sure, for sure. Yeah, I think a lot of it, for me anyway, has a lot to do with having my voice heard and being able to take back some power in a situation where I felt very powerless to begin with. So my experience was with the psychiatric medical system. And there were many times where I felt like my voice was sort of overrun. And sorry, that's my neighbor's dog, if you happen to hear a little barking in the background. So being part of it really gave me a chance to change the narrative and being able to sort of feel like I had control over where I was, how I was in this story that I was living. And on a really practical level, it also gave me some financial and career opportunities. And so things that started off as purely volunteer and interest-based sort of led into opportunities to have paid positions and projects that I was really a big partner in. An example was with Erin, was where I was commissioned to write a play. My background is in playwriting. And there was a study that was going with that. And so because we were looking at stigma, there were certain parameters. And so I was really able to use my skills. And so it built a lot of my confidence back up as well. And so and with that also, it helped me understand what my strengths were. And I think as Erin was talking about, some of my strengths do not reside in writing papers. It might be writing a portion of the paper, but it's definitely not writing the whole paper. And so being able to really leverage what my skills are, I think is a real, for me, it's been a real part of the recovery process as well. I don't know what your thoughts are, Kristi.
No, excellent. I agree with everything you said. And I think, for me, really speaking a little bit more related to that bench research, so that really science heavy type of research, which is an area I think far too often is not given the recognition it needs to be for involving patient partners and the value it can add. I do think that really all types of health research definitely benefit from integrating those lived experience perspectives. And I know that when it comes to that bench research, I found that it really is for patients, for me personally, it's about opening up a whole new world of opportunities for learning, for understanding, for growing my insight. And I say this because I often find those two worlds, we have our science over here, and then we have the real world over here, where we have individuals who are living, who are thriving, who are coping, and who are struggling with various illnesses and diseases. And those two worlds are often not connected. There's a big disconnect. So I find as a patient partner in this type of research that I'm really able to bridge those two worlds. I'm able to serve as that direct link, and I'm able to get involved much, much earlier in the process. Because as a patient, far too often I'm introduced to a lot of the research or those ideas in the clinical setting. So whether it be through clinical trials or being a patient partner in that sort of sphere, or even more as a benefactor or recipient, of new treatments or therapies, I don't always know the process to that point, and I'm not always involved, or I'm rarely actually involved in those new and innovative ideas right at the very beginning, when those concepts are being constructed and formed and taking shape. And I want to be involved in that. I know it's very scientific and complex, but that doesn't mean that I don't want to know about it. Because, for someone whose life is directly dependent upon research, my survival and my quality of life, I want to be involved at that stage. I want to know what's going on. And I find that's, very empowering for me, but I also find that can really aid in communication and that bi-directional relationship between myself and the researcher and that larger patient public and general community, because I'm also learning more about what is it about this research that I think is going to resonate for the larger patient community, so I can serve, as that sort of person that can bridge that divide and really bring that information back there, because I know there's patients out there that want to know about this research, but because that disconnect is happening, that research isn't finding its way back out there. And so I think it just does a lot of disservice. And so I find that really exciting when I can learn more about it and see what really resonates for, the patients and the larger community, and get it back out there into that setting. So I find that's for me a huge benefit. And I'd love to hear from, Erin and Larry's perspective, what they find as well.
Kristi, I want to say exactly what you just said from the perspective of a researcher, because at the heart of this, why this matters for me as a researcher is so similar. It matters because it gives me faith in knowing that the research we're doing is rooted in things that people with lived experience care about, and research that can have impact for meaningful change. And much like any job, research can be tough, and there's times when it's frustrating or you feel stuck, or it's just hard. And coming back to the meaning of what you're doing and holding tight onto that through lived experiences is central for me as a researcher. And then I really believe and have evidence for it improving the quality of the work that we do at so many levels. And you mentioned one that's really important, which is around communications and storytelling. And it's through the storytelling of research, I think, that we can have impact. And you can see that through storytelling at the beginning of deciding what areas of research you want to focus on and prioritizing, and then also through the cycle of the research. But at the end, when you have your results in hand, working with people with lived experience to share the results of that research and move it into action and into health systems change and into a next generation of research is just such a powerful way to work that feels good and is fun. Intrinsically, working like this for me is meaningful and gives me a sheer pleasure a lot of time. So that helps as well when the times are tough or rough. Thank you.
And Erin, maybe I just quickly add to what you said. And I think it's really about that challenging those scientists and those investigators to consider the real world implications as well, and how that real world is going to have significance. Because ultimately, down the line, for patients, there will be benefit in related to how that research is going to impact us. So I just add to that piece.
I just love this conversation because it's really it comes from very different angles. Victoria talking about how much this has helped her in her journey, and how patients help researchers and researchers receive help from patients. I think that this is the really important piece about this, is that we're all coming from it from different perspectives, and it's forcing us to understand our perspectives and to understand how we can work together on this and what our goals are. So to me, the benefit of this is just being able to talk to people and to understand what they need to do to move forward. If the researcher's research priority and the outcomes they want to measure aren't relevant to the patient population they're studying, then what's the point of doing the research? I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, and I'll just echo that, Larry, and just the same with Kristi and Erin, is that the priorities that I felt were important for me, it gave me an avenue to actually influence those really directly from the beginning. And obviously that's not the case for all research studies and projects, but when I was able to see that, so with Erin's group, we were focusing on stigma and creativity. With BCMHSUS, we're focusing on people's lived experience with complex concurrent disorders and having their story told. And so being able to help them have better patient experiences within the healthcare system. And so these are things that drive a person's quality of life and in essence also drive their prognosis and outcomes. And that not only affects them and their families, but it affects communities. And so to me, that's when research really moves from the white tower, the ivory white tower, to actually something that's actually really practical, because I think there can be a real silo effect otherwise. And diversity really drives innovation, and patient engagement doesn't just mean sort of a person with a lived experience. It means a person with a lived experience with potentially a different diverse background. So from a different socioeconomic background, different ethnic background, gender all these different things, so that we can bring a mosaic lens to it, to be able to see what we might not be seeing otherwise if we just had our own perspective. And to me, that's what researchers really want, to have a comprehensive view of things so that they know what the results are really applicable in many, many cases, as opposed to just a very narrow space.
Thank you, Victoria. That was a really great way of summarizing. So this is really very informative, and I really appreciated all of your inputs. So if you're actually interested in doing patient-oriented research, how do you get started in this? Like I'm personally a preclinical and basic researcher, and I would not have any clue. So maybe Larry, if you want to get started on maybe how you would start this.
How many times have I heard that from preclinical researchers? I have no obvious way of connecting with patients. I did qualitative health research, and so I talk to patients all the time. I worked in clinics, so I was constantly talking to patients. But also, when I worked in the molecular biology lab, I never ever spoke to the people that I was hoping to help in my research. So I'm going to tell you a story. This researcher came to me and said that she's a cancer researcher, and she was applying for a grant for an advocacy group, a patient advocacy group for a particular kind of cancer. I won't say what kind, but one of the things that she had to do was to build a patient engagement plan into her work. And so she called me up, Zoomed me up, and said that she had no idea. She had never even met a person with the type of cancer that she was doing research in. So I said, oh, okay, this is interesting. So the very first thing we did was sat down via Zoom with a patient partner, someone that I knew who had a similar cancer to what this person was studying, and just said, let's just talk, let's have coffee and get to know each other. And that was the very first step. It was like an icebreaker. And I think that's kind of one of the misconceptions about patient-oriented research, and especially in preclinical, not that I'm, ganging up on you, but the idea that there are some sort of rules and processes and rigid frameworks that you have to follow. And the fact is that 90% of patient engagement is building relationships with people. And yes, with preclinical research, it's not as obvious. You don't have the access to patients. It's a little bit harder to get in touch with them. But I think once you do, it's that building the relationship and helping to explain your research. If you can explain your research to someone over coffee, then you are on your way to doing this. I'll stop there. See what Erin has to say about that.
I want to get on a bit of a hobby horse right now around, almost jumping in about what you said, Larry, about rules or formulas for doing this right. And I would position that there is actually a rule, which is that it needs to be real and to come from the heart and to be authentic, because there is a real and present danger of doing patient engagement badly, that re-traumatizes communities, that loses faith in health research. So I'd rather see stuff done with heart than not done at all, because I think there's tremendous damage to be done, partly driven by the system. So I think many of us as researchers are in a position where, at least in clinical research, and I think we're seeing this in basic and preclinical research to a lesser extent, but it is a truth, is that many of us are cognizant of the fact that we're not going to get health research dollars or funding unless we have a model for some kind of community engagement that we've articulated. And yet not all of us are trained up or have the maturity or the experience to do that well yet. And the danger of that is that we write it in a grant, or we make a community partnership with a patient or with a community group and then drop them in the water as soon as we have the funding in hand. So really, I think that my rule for doing this is to try to do it, even in small parts of your research, authentically and with heart, or don't, or lean on people who have experience in doing that, and try and upskill, because I think there are real dangers of doing this badly in terms of disengagement. Sorry, I'll get off my hobby horse now.
No, and I would just add to that, I mean, not necessarily coming from a peer researcher perspective, but just particularly from a sort of patient partner, is that the danger is that it's sort of trendy now to have patient engagement, that you almost have to, and from what I understand in grants, to have this as part of your application. And so the danger is for tokenism. And really, I think what I would appreciate more than anything, which I think both Larry and Erin have spoken to, is that authenticity, that if someone's not even early in their career, but new to patient engagement, to recognizing, making it safe for a person to speak up if they feel like, okay, I feel like I'm being sidelined, or what is my role? Like, what are, creating clear expectations so that I'm not disappointed. I was in a situation where we had a patient committee, and the expectations of the people that were our patient partners had different expectations than what we were able to do as peer researchers. And so there was a dissatisfaction with what they were able to contribute. And part of that was it just wasn't clarified from the very beginning. And then people would have had a choice to either continue or not continue. And to me, that's when that it's really about that authentic communication, because then I think people who have been involved in it won't have a bad experience. They won't continue to sort of take that history with them, or talk about it with other individuals and say, well, my experience wasn't good. They can be able to actually recognize what was right and what went wrong and stuff. So.
Thank you so much, Victoria. I think you made such a good point about tokenism and trying to avoid that. And I think building on what both Erin and Larry said, for me, it's really about creating and establishing that safe space, as you mentioned as well, Victoria, where really I'm valued and I'm respected. And I'm also welcomed on to the team, and I'm seen as a true team member. And for me, in order for that to happen, not only do you need to get to know me, in order for me to feel safe, that I want to be able to open and share my experiences and my input and my feedback, but I also need to have a sense that the team very much recognizes that there is a power imbalance here, and that I'm coming into something where I most likely do not know anyone. I am not likely to necessarily know a great deal about the subject matter, particularly when it's bench research. So it's very complex in scientific terms. That's going to be a huge learning curve for me. And so it's about the team recognizing that and taking the time to really properly, I think, onboard me, educate me, and empower me so I'm able to really contribute in a meaningful way. All those things together really show me that this team is valuing why I'm there and what I have to give. I think that's huge. And it's really about meeting me where I'm at. For some of that more preclinical work, the very science heavy type of stuff, when I come into a project, I don't necessarily, thinking of some of my past experiences, I didn't necessarily need to know all the names of the hundreds of antibodies, but I did need to know, what was an antibody? antibody, just like I didn't need to know, the complex chemical composition of a preservation solution or, anything like that. But I did need to know what did pH stand for, and, little simple things like that. And so I think it's really about meeting me where I'm at as well.
Thank you, Kristi. As a preclinical researcher, that definitely resonated with me. I know way too many antibodies, and I have no idea what would be super relevant to people. So I think the last kind of question before we'll move on to audience style questions is maybe lessons learned that you've experienced during your time in in patient-oriented research, / a take-home message that you would like to give to everybody.
Well, I think I'll just start off as that, because I really don't want researchers to be sort of frightened of like, okay, I want to do this right, and there are some rules, but not any rules. And I guess, and I don't know if this is for researchers or not, but just that researchers are people too. Like that's what I realized, is that they're being able to share your own vulnerabilities is really helpful. And being able to sort of know that we might both be stumbling along the way makes it a lot easier for me to speak up if I don't sort of understand something, or if I'm feeling sort of shy about asking something in particular. Because I remember when I first started, and like Kristi was saying, there were these words that I had no idea what they meant. And it was hard to raise my hand and say, hey, could you explain what this acronym means? And but when the situation was safe, it felt really easy. And part of that safety was created by the research lead saying, hey, we're new at this. We're going to stumble along with you. Please feel free to put up your hand if you feel like we're making a mistake or something, because we're learning alongside you. And so when that happened, it was like, we're partners in this, and not just partners in the research, but partners in the process. So people didn't feel like there were minefields everywhere. And so to me, that's one other part of the partnership, is being able to be willing to sort of say, okay, we're in this together, and let's see what we can do and what we can learn from it, so that the next time can even be a better iteration of it.
And I would just add to that, I always kind of like to say, where where there's a will, there's a way. And it's okay if you're out there and you're feeling a little bit intimidated or unsure or even unclear where to really start in your own poor journey. You don't need to jump into the deep end of the pool. You don't have to go from 0 to 100 overnight. It's a process and it's a journey. And it's about quoting Larry here, who always likes to say, and I don't want to take your words, Larry, but it really is these little baby steps. And it's about, you can get your feet wet. You don't need to jump in head first. It's a process, and it's not going to happen overnight. So be patient with yourself. But I think it really is about that intent and that desire. And we are always going to be stronger together than we are apart. And the research is going to ultimately benefit it. And I think, we ultimately all want the same thing, and that's to ensure research that is going to be really robust and useful and helpful. So to do that, we need to work together. We need to collaborate. So those are my final thoughts, but I'm sure Larry and Erin have some as well.
Unmute myself there. Hey, yeah, absolutely. Kristi has heard me say that many times. Baby steps, baby steps. Start small, and as Erin pointed out, the damage that you could do by trying to do something that you're not good at it yet, there is a possibility of doing damage. So you want to start off in a very controlled, small sort of way where you can actually do meaningful, very good engagement with someone. And as Kristi pointed out, that includes bringing them on board, educating them in a way that's going to allow them to contribute meaningfully to the project, and to avoid tokenism, and with a commitment to actually make sure that you're really going to consider what their suggestions are for the decisions that you have to make in your research, and hopefully this is going to provide insight to you that you need for this work. So I think a couple of things that you need to think about is that it does take time and money. There are tools for helping you to figure out costs and expenses that you might need to consider. There are guides, there are websites. There's a new website in Belgium that has tools for preclinical researchers, for example. And really, one of the biggest differences between preclinical research and any other type of research is that the language needs to be considered very carefully, because there's so many terms, as Kristi pointed out, that patients might not understand. So you just need to spend that extra bit of time to make sure that the person that you're engaging with is going to be up to speed with the language. Kind of like how if you had a trainee in your team, right? It's somewhat similar. Erin, what do you think?
I'll just try and sort of emulate some of the wording that we've heard here. I think, one of the things as I reflect back on my career from becoming an early career researcher through to sort of, more mature, is that when you're establishing your program of research and you're in the early days, you're encouraged by every single piece of the system to tell everybody how special and different and unique you are as a person and your program of research is. And that's important, and you need to do that to secure funding and to do good research. You need to demonstrate that you're doing something that is uniquely positioned. But I think the danger of that is that it builds ego and it centralizes yourself in that process. And so over 20 years of research, psychologically, the greatest growth I've gone through has been to deconstruct my ego in this process, to park it, to really lean into vulnerability and the times when I make mistakes, and to concentrate on the subtle forms of power and not so subtle forms of power that lace every part of academic research, and to be really conscious of looking for those and doing my little bit and chipping away at systems to try and deconstruct those power systems that are so strong. And it makes our program of research better. And just in terms of my own human development, it's been one of the most powerful and fun and interesting processes I've ever been through. So it's so worth it.
Thank you so much. That was a really wonderful final thoughts. We're moving into taking questions from the audience, and we have our first question on the Whova platform, which is from Michelle Padley. The question is, how does cultural awareness, safety, and sensitivity factor into patient-centered work, in your opinion? And it doesn't say at who. So.
Well, whether you're taking a racialized or ethnocultural or gender lens on this, we know that still at this point, the majority of health research is conducted and disseminated through populations that are not diverse enough. Much of our preclinical work is actually still done, clinical work is done in populations that are not akin to, the population, the diversity of Canada or North America, for example. So there are real consequences to this that are quite dire. As we continue into the Q&A session, I'll share in the chat some work that the BC Support Unit has really been spearheading to think about how we can better embrace folks from different walks of life in health research and think about some of the barriers in the systems that are most people face to engagement. We've really been working hard in this space to think about systems and structures and engagement practices for folks who are marginalized or disenfranchised from health research in a number of ways. So I'll dig out that link and put it into the chat as other people answer.
I can answer from one of the projects, a storytelling project that we created that became animated videos at BC MHSUS. And we had Indigenous participants, and so we included an elder to often open and close each session. We made sure that the elder was available if anyone needed sort of support, if anyone was in distress. And also just on a very sort of practical level, if there was a technology gap, so individuals that didn't have access to working laptop or a good camera or microphone or something like that, making sure that that was all taken care of and that wasn't a worry or a barrier. So a lot of times I think it's about making it a barrier-free environment and a really culturally supportive space. And sometimes what that means is asking the individuals in the group what they needed. So we created a comfort agreement or a sort of a safety agreement about what would make it the most productive space for them. And so a lot of times that's where those ideas came from. What kind of involvement did they want an elder to be? Was it someone to be there all the time to talk about examples and teach what has passed their wisdom on, or was it just closing and opening, and all the other things like ways of being able to support them emotionally and as also technically and flexibility wise. So those were some things that we've done, and I think it really served us. Kristi and Larry.
Thanks, Victoria. I would just add to that I think it is really vital and it's an essential component, whether it comes to the research itself or your patient partners. And this is another area where you really need to be careful and cognizant not to be tokenistic. I know for me in our research world, we often see the same people over and over, and there is a great lack of diversity. And you have to be very cautious as well that you're not continuously going to the same person and seeing and kind of checking that box off and saying, okay, great, we've got that diversity and that inclusion piece, great. You need to ensure that you're getting diverse perspectives. So that means more than one. And I think all too often when it comes to the research as well, this is a piece that's often overlooked. And so is your research going to be truly representative and responsive to the dynamic and diverse needs of a community? Not necessarily. So I think it's about being very aware of that piece. So that's one of the main pieces I would add. And I think also educating yourself about a lot of the historical considerations of a population as well. I think you can't engage with those individuals in necessarily the same way you would with other populations, whatever it may be, and being aware of some of those considerations, whether it's through being, patient participants in your research, so those who are providing, with information and data, or for patient partners. So you have the onus is on you as well as a researcher to really do your own homework and to do your own research, so to speak, to really be able, again, to meet everyone where they are at, and to also, not to be afraid to ask them, what do you need? How can I ensure that this is going to be a rewarding and safe experience for you? So just add that. Larry, anything further?
So I keep I'm having a hard time unmuting myself. Yeah, I think everything that you've all said is absolutely perfect. I really love Victoria's example. I mean, if you are going to invite someone to your space, then you have to make that space an inviting place for them. And I think that has to be one of the considerations that you do. It oftentimes partnerships that develop in research, they come from a particular patient who reaches out to a researcher because they want to get involved in some particular way. They might want to be involved as a participant, but then they can learn how to be involved as a partner too. So I think that is kind of like the stage we are in the evolution of this, is that we're kind of relying on people who come and knock at our door. But the onus is on us now to start inviting more people in.
Yeah, I'd even say, our panel today, right? We're not the most diverse group of individuals necessarily. So I think it's always about being cognizant of that and really taking, intentional effort and steps to address that. Not that we're not an amazing panel, but I think that's just, one little example to be aware of, right? We often don't consider it or think about it.
Thank you. That was a really good answer. I especially like how you pointed out that even our panel does not have a lot of diversity. I think that's very common in academia, that it's just accepted that there isn't a lot of diversity, and hopefully coming years we can approach and deal with this. I don't see any other questions, so I'll ask one of my own. I was really resonated with, Erin, you talked about power imbalance and how to address and overcome a lot of power imbalance. Can you speak to that a little bit more?
Sure, let me try and give you some kind of pragmatic examples of ways of tackling that are small that might be effective. And in the link that I gave you to the BC Support Unit materials, educational materials, there's a whole section just focused on, it sounds simple, but just focused on conducting your first meeting with patients in a sort of, patient advisory group meeting, for example. Typically what happens in that situation is I go first as the academic. I introduce myself. I start by saying, I'm Dr. such and such with a PhD in such and such, and I have specialist expertise in this. Right from the way you do your introductions in a classic traditional form like that in patient engagement work is typical of power systems as they exist. And there are certain simple strategies that you can take about, talking about the things that you care about outside of your work life, thinking about who introduces themselves, introducing your own vulnerabilities, doing something we haven't necessarily done yet in this panel, which is to acknowledge that many of us have dual roles. I've experienced mental health problems and I'm a researcher, and not passing that out from the outset. So there are lots of pragmatic tools developed by the support unit and other great organizations that sound quite simple, but can be quite effective in terms of dismantling power. And to pick up on what Larry said before about creating safe spaces, sometimes those spaces, maybe they shouldn't be in universities, maybe for people who are marginalized, working two jobs, have a hard time engaging. Research has to go to them. We have to go to those communities rather than expecting people to come to us, even if the spaces we're creating at UBC or SFU or our institutions seem safe. Maybe that's not the right place to be hosting engagement events.
Oh, so true. Doing an engagement in a hospital setting, for example, you have a boardroom next to your clinic, so you think, I'll just do it there. And then you're surprised that no one wants to come there because, first of all, it's hard to get to a hospital, you park and whatever, but it's also traumatizing because you go there for treatment and you've experienced maybe some heavy duty treatments there in that clinic. Now you're going next door to it. Sometimes you got to think these things through and think, okay, so do we need to go to a more neutral place? I think that's kind of one of the biggest, the best things that you can do is create a neutral space. Like go for coffee and sit and talk in a coffee shop in your first meeting. And don't expect to talk about your project, talk about yourselves.
And can I just add to the, about breaking down those barriers? It's about thinking about even simple logistics. So for your partners, for your patient partners, or however they may identify, are there challenges with the logistics of getting to that location? Do they have childcare, or do they have care duties that are perhaps making it difficult for them to engage in that work? So how can you take steps to really address that and rectify it? So again, that comes back to that piece around that remuneration and that compensation and reimbursement that Larry very briefly touched on. And we don't have nearly enough time to really delve into that, but I think it's about recognizing what are some of those barriers and how can you as a researcher work with your patient partner to address those and to make those a lot more minimal, I think is huge. And also, as Erin spoke to, sharing sort of the work and the sort of those responsibilities. And even when it comes to, and this is going a little bit kind of out there, but even when it comes to, say, the knowledge translation, and when you are presenting your research findings and you're sharing what your research is about, it's always the researcher who is doing that. It's always team members who are sharing those findings. But you know what? Your patient partner has those same capabilities. They can communicate in a slightly different way. Yes, they can't talk about the science or perhaps all the methodology as well as you can, but they can add value to that. And that's something that I have found really rewarding as well for me and has really helped make me feel as, part of that team, broken down those power imbalances for me, is to invite me to really help to share and contribute to that work as well. But I will stop there.
Thank you. That was a really great answer. I think that having the opportunity that allow people who are patient partners to present would be very interesting and a great way to make patient-oriented research more, I guess, knowledgeable. Like, why can't patients present at conferences or whatever?
I can actually speak to that because with the BCMHSUS group, there were two of us who were strategic advisors, three of us, but two that were available and presented with the other individuals that were clinicians involved in the project. And so we presented at a conference, and it really leveled the field. And I think it actually upped their credibility by including people who were not only involved in the project, but who had lived experience and understanding what the actual process was like. And so we definitely brought different perspectives from sort of Catherine was really speaking about sort of the context of the project, the outcomes that were hoped for and the deliverables. And then we were really speaking about the process at hand and where the wins were for both ourselves as strategic advisors and the people that were involved as patient partners, that we were, because we had the eye, and as Kristi said, that we were sort of the bridge between those two worlds, that we probably were only able to see those distinguishing features. And so I think it really brought a lot to each presentation, and it was rewarding, I know, for everybody involved.
Thank you, Victoria. I don't see any more questions. If anybody in Zoom has a question, they can raise their hand. If not,
can I just add something before everyone goes away? So there are resources available. There are websites. There's this BC support unit. We provide consultations for patient engagement, for example, for research teams. And I think it's not rocket science in a lot of ways, which no disrespect to rocket scientists. But I think it really requires that little bit of extra, attention and work, and the little bit of work at the beginning has a big payoff later on. So I encourage you to, if you have questions, we can direct you to. CIHR has some good guidelines for compensation, for other, there are tools for doing budgets. There's lots of stuff out there, lots of guidelines, and lots of insight that you can find. So feel free to ask me personally if you have any questions, but I'll take a look online and see what you can find.
And kudos to the organizing committee for this conference as well, for putting this panel together and creating this space. That in itself, I think, is a really important indicator of the importance of the collective work that we're doing. Really appreciate the opportunity to share, our experiences with such an amazing panel this morning.
And I would just also, on a final note, applaud all of you for attending, for, awesome you chose ours to join, but I really applaud you for wanting to learn more about this and to know that I think anyone can do this work. And so just, give it a try and take those first steps.
Victoria, any final words?
No, I just think fail forward. Like, just be able to go in, be willing to fumble around, and do your best. And if you're at all inspired to do this, like Larry was saying and Kristi was saying, just baby steps. So even just introducing yourself to a patient that's involved in the research area of study that you're working in, and see if it's something that really calls to you. And if it does, things and doors will open up, and people I know are really willing to support others that are doing this work. So go forth and research.
Thank you, Victoria. That was a really great final note. And thank you all for your contributions to this panel. It was very enriching for myself, and I'm sure for everyone in attendance as well.
Thanks, Morgan.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Thank you for having me. Bye now.
Bye. Thank
Good
you.
to see everyone.